what I've observed is a change. In 1970, Guadeloupe was a small, laid-back Caribbean island. You know, you could go to the beach, and that's how kids enjoy themselves, running and playing ball on the beach and so forth. Now, Guadeloupe is a place that has so many speed bumps just to prevent. People drive like absolute maniacs, even in poor weather conditions, and you just really have to hang on. They obviously know what they're doing, but it's really hair-raising at times. Okay, I went down there to look at changes that I've noticed. Okay, traditional toys. Way back when this was a puppet, this was a doll. This was made for me. It's very special because it was made for me by a very old lady. She cannot believe that I wanted to bring this to America. She kept saying, please let me throw this one and make a good one for you. You can come back next week, I'll have a real one. And I said, no, this is the one, please, I'd like to have. Because she just cut it out, and she said this is how they played, cut little bits out and push the head through. And this was called a puppet. And this was the doll of the poor. At the time, you had porcelain dolls. But only wealthy people could afford the porcelain dolls. What was interesting is that everyone that I spoke to that had had a porcelain doll said they were never allowed to play with the porcelain doll. It was for decorative purposes only. So one lady told me, oh, my aunt would break my hand if I ever touched. The only time you touch the doll apparently was to dust it. So, and because at least 8 women told me the same thing separately, I think that there was something to it. These dolls were expensive and were for decoration. Now, so this is someone in her 70s who made this for me. And then I talked with a young lady who was 20 or 21, and I said, well, you know, I heard that, you know, people played with puppet, and so what did you grow up with? She said, moi j'ai grandi avec mes Barbie, hein? And I said, oh, Barbie? And she said, yes, you know, for her, this is what a doll is. And so it's for me, what I'm interested in finding out is, when did this change take place? Okay, I'm interested in finding out that pivotal point. Right? We went from puppet to Barbie. We went from Ticabwa, which is the old, I had this made by a manufacturer of traditional toys, because it's making a comeback. And when did they go from this to the motorized toys? When did they go from this type of little top to one that I borrowed? This is not from Guadeloupe, but they have similar things there. When did this change over? When did boys particularly stop going out shooting birds, okay, with that? When did they stop using their rara? It's not Easter, but this is a traditional toy. I'm interested in finding out when that change took place, because in 40 years there's been a change. Did it happen halfway? Did it happen a quarter? I cannot make any sort of projection now because I haven't analyzed my data. I'll just have to go through and note what everyone says, and then, you know, put them in graphs and see when the changes. I'm interested in changes: when, where, how, why. Okay. One of the questions I was asking people, who played? And some people looked at me. I said, yeah, I want to know who played. And everyone, well, you know, everyone played. And then you find that one person, actually 2 people out of almost 60 said, moi j'ai jamais joué. And they really, one lady said she never played. And another guy told me he was raised by his grandmother and playing was a waste of time. He said, c'était une perte de temps. I was not allowed to play. And at first and then you realize, no, they're absolutely serious. And so, Who plays? Not everyone played. Who had toys? Not everyone had store-bought toys. 90% of the people had to make. I asked them, well, what did you make your toys out of? And they said anything you could get your hands out on. And they call them matière de récupération, which is old tires, old pieces of wood, coconut, I don't know what you call them, but from the coconut tree, the stems, anything. And they made different things. There were seasonal games, right? When during hurricane season, when when the rivers would really swell, they would make little boats and they would have boat races down the streams. That's how they played. There were no cell phones, there was no texting, there were no computers. They had to find ways to entertain themselves. What is also interesting to me is that the socialization was the same as in other societies, in that girls played, most of them. One or two guys said, I used to play with my sister's puput. Right? But most of them said, no, they played with the trucks and the this. And so the women were socialized to be good mothers, and guys were socialized to take care of the family. So those gender roles, again, like everywhere else. Okay? Why am I doing all of this? This is, as Dean Germo mentioned, this is a very small part of a larger project for a doctorate in modern languages. Just thought I'd highlight the differences between everyone. When you hear a doctorate, people say to me, well, when are you going to finish your PhD? And I try to explain to people, it's not a PhD, it's a very different degree. First of all, in order to do this degree, you have to do 2 languages, 2 of the languages offered by Middlebury, and they offer 10 languages. Could be a combination of Arabic and French, German and Spanish, Portuguese and Italian, whatever. My combination is French and Spanish, okay? And whereas a PhD is intended for people who are going to go into research and teach at the real big universities and publish lots of interesting things. The DML is teaching oriented. It's intended for people whose focus is on teaching, and therefore for me that was why I chose this program, particularly because at my age the only thing that's really important is teaching. I'm not going to, at my age, be going out and publishing lots of things for the next 20 years. I don't have that kind of time. I don't. So the DML is teaching oriented, and instead of doing one, if you do a PhD, you're either a literature person, a linguistics person, a culture studies person, or a pedagogy person. For the DML, you are all 4. You have to do your exams in all 4, and you have no choice. Whereas you can sort of, with your PhD, you can talk with your advisor about which courses you want to take, etc. With the DML, you have a little bit of leeway, but not that much. You have to do 4 areas, and you have to do 2 languages. So to design my study, I made a proposal, had certain hypotheses. First of all, I felt that listening to all that I'd heard from my friends, there was a decline in the form of popular culture. There was a decline in the way children play. And it changed over to the modern way of doing things. And I decided to see if I was right or not. I thought that there would be some physiological ramifications. I felt that children's bodies will no longer, because they're no longer running, jumping rope, rushing around and going to visit their friend next door and chasing each other down the street and so forth. Everyone is sitting down texting with their computer and their iPod and so forth. They're exactly like here. I thought that sedentary lifestyle could probably have some physiological effects. So I decided to check with a friend of mine from the 1970s. Era, who has been a practicing pediatrician for 30 plus years. And I also asked him, and he introduced me to another pediatrician, and they both confirmed that yes, they have noticed these changes with the younger people. There's weight gain, okay, and above all, there is the addiction factor, where the children are just addicted. They cannot imagine living without these gadgets. So again, I'm not a medical person, I'm just a curious person, so I thought all of this would be interesting as part of the changes. Okay, so to do my preliminary investigation, I had to do a lot of reading, establish a theoretical framework. I had to figure out, is this workable or not? Would there be people who would be willing to talk to me? So I made a first trip to do a feasibility survey, okay, made initial contacts with people, and then went back to record oral histories. I went back to listen to people tell their stories, and it would take us a long time to listen to all of that, but there are some very beautiful stories. The oldest person I spoke with was 85 years old, and the youngest 20, and I had quite a spread, males and females. Okay, then now I do have to do the analysis and the writing, and at some point, not next year, Dean Shermo, the oral defense. I will have to defend this thesis in both French and Spanish. There will be a panel sitting in front of me from the French school and the Spanish school, one asking in French, one asking in Spanish, and I have to defend myself for a couple of hours. I'll need more time. Okay, what is the value of all of this to UWSP? For me, I need to keep current. I need to give my students something new. I had professors who used to use the same notes for 20 years, and I always made a mental note that if I ever became a teacher, that would not be something I would do. So I try to keep up with as much as I can so that my students could gain something from this. What is my main? I have no illusions that all the verbs and all the adjectives that I teach, I always tell them, I would not flatter myself to think that 3 semesters down the road, if you do my 101 class, that you'd be speaking French or Spanish. I have no illusions about that. However, what I want you to do, to take from my class, is always an awareness of other cultures. There are students who've said to me, but this is not a geography class. I say, oh yes it is. If you're learning a language, you're learning history, you're learning geography, you're learning sociology, you're learning a bit of everything. And so I insist on the cultural literacy factor. Any of my students would tell you that I am very strong on that. I want my students to develop cultural sensitivity. I want them not to ask questions that they might not think of as intrusive or inappropriate. So I give them examples of things that have affected me, questions that people have asked me coming here, because as long as you're different, you know already that you're different. There are times when people don't mean to be offensive, but they ask you a question that makes your difference stand out. I try to teach my students that different is beautiful, and therefore there's no need to make a big deal about it. If someone wants to tell you something, they will eventually tell you, but you don't just walk up to someone and ask them questions that are borderline intrusive. So cultural sensitivity, very important. When students, I always tell my students that once they leave my class, they should never tell anyone, you have an accent. Everyone has one. Because when people say to me, you have an accent, I really am tempted. I've never done it. I've never had the courage. I think I'll wait until I'm over 65, and then I'll start telling people, why so do you? But so far I haven't done it. Because from my perspective, you have an accent too. And what does that do? You don't mean to hurt someone, but someone who's more sensitive than I am to it would feel that you're highlighting their difference. And that's not always a comfortable position in which to find yourself, because no one walks up to anyone else. I wouldn't walk up to you and say, so you have an accent, or I wouldn't ask you any questions, right? And because you don't look different. And so those are the types of sensitivity that I want my students to have. Whether or not they I would love for them to remember my verbs, but the passé composé, I send them on to Monsieur Toomey because he's an expert on that. Okay. So thank you for listening. That's what I had to say about my my research, and I would be happy to take questions in English or French.
Beverley, line on one of the slides near the end where it mentioned the Festival of Toys. But you didn't
Oh
talk
yes,
about it.
yes, that's a sore point. It was last Saturday. Yes, it hurt me to the core. I couldn't make it. The festival, it was the inaugural festival of traditional games and toys. Took place last Saturday in Guadeloupe. I couldn't go. I'm here, I'm working, I couldn't go. And so I pretend that it didn't happen. It was supposed to happen in July, but it didn't happen, and so yes, but it did. I hear that it was really wonderful, well attended by people from all over the Caribbean, because there's quite a movement now for the recovery of cultural memory. This young man who organized this, he's just 33 or 34 years old. He studied sociology, but decided that he wanted to get into manufacturing games and toys. So he works more with. He has a little factory that I visited in January and was able to see him manufacture. And they made all of these. They made them specially for me. That's why my name's on all of them. Yeah. So. Somebody else had a question? Oui.
J'aimerais juste savoir, étant donné que nous, en tant qu'Africains, nous avons été aussi influencés par la culture française. Et donc, nos valeurs culturelles tendent à disparaître de nos jours. Est-ce que vous pensez que le gouvernement, en collaboration avec la population, pourrait essayer de redonner une valeur encore à la culture que les Africains ont encore dans la Guadeloupe?
Enfin, le gouvernement français, je pense, le gouvernement français dit en principe qu'il n'y a pas de différence, quoi. La France, la Guadeloupe, c'est la France. Donc pour le gouvernement, ils ne vont pas décourager ça, mais en même temps, ils ne vont pas l'encourager. Ils ne vont pas, c'est-à-dire qu'ils disent, oui, on essaye de mettre en relief la culture de la Guadeloupe, etc., la mise en valeur, etc. Mais on dit que bon, c'est parler pour ne rien dire, parce qu'une fois qu'ils repartent en métro, c'est fini. C'est-à-dire qu'ils n'ont pas de budget spécial pour la Guadeloupe. La Guadeloupe a d'autres problèmes. Hein. Le niveau de chômage est tellement élevé que vraiment, c'est pas. Enfin, c'est dommage, mais ce sont les Guadeloupéens qui sont responsables de prendre en main leur patrimoine culturel. Et c'est la raison pour laquelle les jeunes, comme ce jeune homme Jean-Paul Kiko, lui, il a décidé que voilà, que sa culture est très importante pour lui, et donc il va de village en village, de ville en ville, et puis il essaye, il fait des animations dans les écoles, partout en ville, on peut le voir un peu partout, parce que c'est aux Guadeloupéens de se charger de promouvoir leur culture. C'est pas au gouvernement, quoi. Enfin, ouais. Oh, sorry, that question was. That question was about, Brice is from Ivory Coast, and he was saying, you know, that given that there were certain similarities in terms of the whole colonial influence, and that